Isiah Patterson spent 6 years on Arizona's death row, his life ticking down to a final moment for stabbing his girlfriend, Consquelo Barker, repeatedly in a Mesa apartment as their 3-year-old son slept nearby, her desperate screams for help echoing into the night. To understand how he ended up there, we must rewind to the beginning, where the seeds of his tragic path were sown. Hit that like button and you subscribe to be part of our growing community. Also, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from as we dive into this chilling story. Isiah Patterson was born in the late 1970s in Arizona, though exact details of his birthplace and early years remain scarce in public records. What is known paints a picture of a turbulent childhood marked by instability. Growing up in a working-class neighborhood, likely in the Phoenix area, Isiah was raised in a family where tension often simmered beneath the surface. Court documents and appeals don't delve deeply into his family dynamics, but they hint at a fractured home life. His parents' relationship status is unclear, but there's no mention of a stable two-parent household, suggesting he may have faced the challenges of a single-parent home or shifting caregivers. Financial struggles likely loomed large, as the environment he grew up in was far from affluent, with limited resources shaping his early years. As a young boy, Isiah showed signs of being a bright but restless child. He attended local schools, but his education was disrupted by behavioral issues. By his teens, he was already clashing with authority. School records, though not publicly detailed, likely noted fights or disciplinary problems, as his later life suggests a pattern of impulsivity and aggression. These weren't just childish outbursts, they were early flickers of a deeper anger, perhaps fueled by a sense of abandonment or unmet needs. Did he feel invisible in a world that seemed to offer him little? The lack of documented intervention, no mention of counseling or support, suggests he slipped through the cracks. By his late teens, Isiah was no stranger to trouble. Petty crimes, possibly theft or minor assaults, began to mark his path, though specific juvenile records remain sealed or unmentioned in available sources. These early brushes with the law weren't enough to derail him completely, but they set a dangerous precedent. He was learning to solve problems with fists or defiance, a trait that would later spiral into something far darker. Living in a rough neighborhood, he was exposed to violence and desperation, influences that chipped away at any hope of a stable future. Was there a moment when he could have turned back? A teacher, a friend, or a relative who saw the good in him? If there was, it's lost to history. By his early 20s, Isiah was a man shaped by hardship and unchecked impulses. He drifted into relationships and odd jobs, never finding solid ground. His connection with Consquelo Barker, the mother of his child, offered a glimpse of stability, but even that was fragile. The couple's life together in a Mesa apartment was marked by arguments, hinting at a volatile dynamic. What pushed Isiah from petty troublemaker to a man capable of such a brutal act? The answer lies in those early years: poverty, instability, and a growing rage that no one seemed to notice until it was too late. On March 17, 2006, in a quiet Mesa, Arizona, the night began like many others in the small apartment Isiah shared with Consquelo and their young son. Court records paint a picture of a couple whose relationship was often stormy, with frequent arguments that sometimes turned physical. On March 17th, around 1:30 a.m., the tension boiled over. Inside their Mesa apartment, a heated fight broke out. The exact trigger remains unclear. Perhaps a disagreement over money, parenting, or personal grievances. But the noise was loud enough to disturb a downstairs neighbor. For about 10 minutes, the neighbor heard loud crashes and the sound of objects rolling across the floor, as if furniture was being shoved or thrown. Was this a fight spiraling out of control, or something more sinister brewing? The argument wasn't just verbal. Evidence suggests it turned physical, with Consquelo fighting to defend herself. After those 10 chaotic minutes, the apartment fell eerily silent. For another 10 minutes, nothing stirred. Then suddenly, Consquelo burst from the apartment, naked and screaming for help, her voice piercing the early morning stillness. She ran through the outdoor common areas of the complex, desperate to escape. Her screams were a chilling cry for survival, but Isiah was close behind, his rage unrelenting. What drove him to chase her? The answer would soon be written in blood. Consquelo's desperate flight led her to a sand volleyball pit within the apartment complex, a place meant for carefree games, now the stage for a tragedy. Isiah caught up to her there. He overpowered her, pinning her down in the sand. Armed with a butcher knife, a weapon he either carried from the apartment or grabbed during the chase, he attacked with unrelenting fury. He stabbed Consquelo 13 times, the blade tearing into her face, torso, and arm. Each strike was deliberate, fueled by a rage that seemed to block out all reason. The wounds were deep and savage, with some so severe they suggested a frenzied determination to end her life. Consquelo, still conscious during parts of the attack, suffered unimaginable physical pain and mental anguish. Knowing her young son was asleep just yards away in the apartment, her screams faded as her strength gave out, leaving a scene of horror in the sand. The volleyball pit, once a place of community and laughter, was now a gruesome crime scene. Blood soaked the sand, and Consquelo's body lay still, her life stolen in a matter of minutes. The brutality of the attack shocked even seasoned investigators. The jury later found the murder especially cruel, a legal term reflecting the extreme suffering Consquelo endured as she fought to live. Her 3-year-old son, asleep in the apartment, was left motherless, unaware of the tragedy unfolding outside. How could a father commit such an act so close to his own child? The question haunted those who learned of the crime. The murder of Consquelo Barker was more than a crime. It was a devastating blow to her family and community. For her son, only 3 years old, the loss of his mother was a wound that would shape his life forever. He was too young to understand the violence that took her, but the absence of her love and presence would be felt for years to come. Consquelo's family, though not detailed in public records, undoubtedly grappled with grief and disbelief, mourning a vibrant woman whose life was cut short in a moment of unimaginable cruelty. The Mesa community, particularly those in the apartment complex, was shaken. Neighbors who heard her screams or saw the aftermath carried the trauma of that night, a reminder that violence could erupt even in familiar, everyday spaces. The image of a young mother running for her life, only to be hunted down, left a scar on the collective memory of those who knew her story. And Isiah Patterson's actions after the murder were as chilling as the crime itself. Instead of fleeing immediately or seeking help, he called 911, not once, but twice. The first call was brief. He hung up abruptly, leaving dispatchers puzzled. Minutes later, he called again, his voice frantic but calculated. "You had better get here quick." "I just did something bad with a butcher knife," he said, according to court records. It was a confession of sorts, but not one driven by remorse. He didn't explain or plead for forgiveness. He simply alerted authorities to the horror he had caused. Why make the call at all? Was it a moment of clarity or a twisted attempt to control the narrative? When Mesa police arrived at the apartment complex, they found Consquelo's body in the volleyball pit, the sand stained with her blood. Isiah was arrested on the spot, offering no resistance. He didn't try to run or hide, perhaps knowing the weight of his actions was inescapable. The butcher knife, likely still at the scene or recovered nearby, became a key piece of evidence, its blade matching the wounds on Consquelo's body. In the hours and days that followed, Isiah remained largely silent about the details, offering no clear motive during initial questioning. His calm demeanor after such a violent act puzzled investigators. Did he feel regret, or was he already detached from the gravity of what he'd done? Patterson's own confession on the second call, recorded and later presented in court, was damning. Police found no evidence of an intruder or alternative suspect, and the couple's 3-year-old son, asleep in the apartment, was unharmed, ruling out a random attack. The timeline, argument, chase, and murder aligned with the neighbor's account and physical evidence. But was there more to Patterson's past that strengthened the case against him? Isiah Patterson never disputed that he killed Consquelo Barker. His initial defense, as presented in court, leaned on the argument that the murder was not premeditated, but rather a spontaneous act born of passion or rage. He didn't offer a detailed alibi, as the evidence, his 911 calls, the neighbor's testimony, and his presence at the scene, made denial impossible. Instead, his defense likely focused on mitigating intent, arguing that the killing wasn't planned, which could reduce the charge from first-degree murder to second-degree murder to a lesser offense like manslaughter. But how could he justify such a brutal attack? The prosecution was ready to dismantle his claims. The trial held in Maricopa County Superior Court in 2009 was intense. The prosecution presented a clear narrative. Patterson and Consquelo argued in their Mesa apartment. The fight escalated, and he chased her outside, stabbing her 13 times with a butcher knife in a especially cruel manner, as defined by Arizona law. The jury heard the neighbor's chilling account of the argument and Consquelo's screams, corroborated by the 911 calls where Patterson admitted his actions. The forensic evidence, particularly the knife and the nature of the wounds, showed a deliberate, sustained attack, undermining any claim of a fleeting loss of control. The prosecution also highlighted the emotional weight of the crime, Consquelo's suffering as she fought for her life, and the fact that their 3-year-old son was left motherless. On the sentencing date in 2009, exact date not specified in sources, the jury sentenced Isiah Patterson to death. The decision was automatic grounds for appeal under Arizona law, but in 2012, the Arizona Supreme Court upheld the conviction and sentence, finding no reversible errors. Patterson's fate was sealed, but questions lingered. Could his defense have done more to sway the jury, or was the evidence simply too overwhelming? The tragedy of Consquelo's death and the shadow it cast over their young son remained the heart of a case that gripped Mesa and beyond. After his 2009 conviction, Isiah Patterson was sent to Arizona's death row at the Rincon unit of the Arizona State Prison Complex in Tucson. Life on death row was a stark contrast to the chaos of his past, a world of concrete walls, strict routines, and endless waiting. The Rincon unit, designed for high-security inmates, is a place where time crawls. Cells are small, typically 8 by 10 feet, with a bed, desk, and toilet, and inmates spend about 23 hours a day locked inside. Patterson's days likely followed the rigid schedule: meals delivered through a slot, limited recreation time in a caged yard, and occasional showers. Did he find any purpose in this confined world, or did his anger fester in silence? Details about Patterson's behavior on death row are sparse in public records, but the environment itself is grueling. Death row inmates face isolation with limited contact beyond guards and occasional visits from family or attorneys. Patterson's interactions with guards or other inmates aren't well documented, but the Rincon unit's strict protocols suggest he had little room for troublemaking without consequences. Arizona's death row allows inmates access to books, writing materials, and sometimes a radio or TV, so Patterson may have spent his time reading or writing, though no specific accounts confirm this. Did he reflect on the murder of Consquelo Barker, the mother of his son, or did he remain detached from the weight of his actions? There's no clear evidence that Patterson showed remorse. Court records don't mention him expressing regret during his trial or appeals, and his 911 call, "I just did something bad with a butcher knife," lacked the tone of guilt. Instead, it suggested a cold acknowledgement of his act. Some inmates turn to religion for solace, but nothing in the available sources indicates Patterson sought spiritual redemption or joined prison ministries. He did, however, pursue legal appeals. In 2012, the Arizona Supreme Court reviewed his case, focusing on issues like jury selection and the trial's fairness, but they upheld his conviction and death sentence. Patterson's attorneys argued the murder wasn't premeditated, hoping to reduce his penalty, but the jury's finding that the killing was especially cruel held firm. Each failed appeal brought him closer to an inevitable end. Was there a moment when he realized his fate was sealed? The weight of Patterson's situation was heavy. Living under a death sentence must have shaped his days. Yet his crime cast a long shadow. The brutality of stabbing Consquelo 13 times in a public volleyball pit ensured that sympathy was scarce, even among those who knew him. His life on death row was a limbo of routine and dread, a stark reminder of the life he took and the one he'd lost. Isiah Patterson's execution took place on March 19, 2025, at the central unit of the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence, where Arizona carries out its death sentences. Public records don't provide a detailed account of his final day, but Arizona's execution protocols and general practices offer a clear picture of how such days unfold. The morning likely began early, around 5 a.m., with Patterson waking in a special holding cell near the execution chamber, a standard practice for condemned inmates. He would have been under constant watch by guards, ensuring no self-harm or disruption. Did he sleep at all, knowing what lay ahead? Patterson's activities that day aren't specified, but inmates typically have limited options. They might write final letters, meet with a chaplain, or sit in quiet reflection. Arizona allows visits from approved family, friends, or attorneys, but there's no record of who, if anyone, visited Patterson. His son, now around 22 years old, may have been absent, given the pain of his mother's murder. Patterson's lack of documented remorse suggests he might have spent the day stoic or withdrawn, perhaps still grappling with the reality of his fate. Around noon, he would have been offered a final meal. Arizona inmates can request specific foods within budget and dietary limits, but no source confirms Patterson's choice. Did he ask for something meaningful, like a dish tied to his past? Or did he refuse the meal altogether, as some inmates do? As the afternoon progressed, the execution process began to take shape. Around 5 p.m., guards would have escorted Patterson to the execution chamber, a sterile room with a gurney and a one-way window for witnesses. Arizona uses lethal injection, and in 2025, the state resumed executions after a 2-year pause, using a single-drug protocol of pentobarbital per updated procedures. Patterson was strapped to the gurney, his arms secured for IV lines. Witnesses, likely including media, prison officials, and possibly Consquelo's family, watched from behind the glass. The atmosphere was heavy. Consquelo's loved ones, still carrying the grief of her brutal death, faced the man who took her life. What went through their minds as they watched? No record exists of Patterson's final words, a detail often noted in execution reports but absent here. Some inmates apologize or speak to their victims' families. Others stay silent or defiant. Given Patterson's history, he may have said nothing, leaving the room in solemn quiet. At approximately 6 p.m., the lethal injection began. The pentobarbital, administered through the IV, would have slowed his breathing and heart rate, leading to unconsciousness and death within minutes. He was pronounced dead shortly after, likely around 6:07 p.m. Though the exact time isn't documented, the execution was clinical, efficient, and final, closing a chapter that began with a night of violence in 2006. Isiah Patterson's life ended in a sterile chamber, but the pain he caused Consquelo Barker's family and their now-grown son lingers. His execution marked Arizona's first since a 2022 pause, a moment meant to deliver justice for a crime deemed especially cruel. Yet the absence of remorse or insight into his final thoughts leaves a haunting void. Did Patterson ever truly face the weight of his actions, or did he carry his silence to the end? For Consquelo's loved ones, the execution may have brought closure, but it could never erase the loss. What do you think? Did Patterson's execution serve justice for Consquelo Barker, or does it raise deeper questions about the death penalty's role in healing such profound wounds? Share your thoughts below and hit that subscribe button.